Micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Center's program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SBDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the CTOUR, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo de lo público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral, que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces, nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement "quédate en casa", que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos, no podemos ser neutrales.
100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Center's program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo del público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral. Que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement quédate en casa, que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
And video. And having done both tests this morning, we have the following delegations: Argentina, Belize, Bolivia, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, El Salvador, the United States, Grenada, Guatemala, Haiti, Honduras, Jamaica, Mexico, Nicaragua, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, Dominican Republic, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, and Uruguay. We have quorum, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, A.S. Mendes. Good morning, distinguished permanent representatives, alternate representatives, Mr. Secretary General, Mr. Assistant Secretary General, permanent observers, special guests, ladies and gentlemen. Following verification of the quorum by the Secretariat, I am pleased to declare open this special meeting of the Permanent Council, which has been convened by the Chair pursuant to the authority vested in the Chair in Article 37 of the Rules of Procedure for the purpose of considering the topic entitled The COVID-19 Pandemic, Building Resilience in the Healthcare Sector, as contained in the Order of Business, document CP OD 2364/22, which I hereby submit for the consideration of the Council. There being no observations, we will proceed to adopt it without amendment. Esteemed colleagues, the COVID-19 pandemic is severely testing healthcare systems around the world, leading to a human cost far beyond the impact of the disease itself. Understanding health system resilience has never been more essential. As you may recall, at its last regular session, the OAS General Assembly urged all member states to make the greatest possible effort to continue strengthening public investment in health, which allows for improvement and expansion of national and regional capacities for the development and production of raw materials, vaccines, diagnostic tests, and therapeutics. In this context, and in order to achieve a speedy recovery of regional health sectors and economies, while building resilience in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, OAS member states must redouble their efforts to overcome our region's vulnerability and external dependency during global health emergencies, allowing for adequate preparedness and response capabilities in our region. As we continue to monitor the state of the COVID-19 pandemic in the Americas and its multidimensional impact across all sectors, the Chair has convened this meeting so that we can hear expert perspectives from PAHO, CDC, ECLAC, and the IDB on the prevailing challenges facing all sectors of our society and chart the path towards building in the post-pandemic recovery. Before I proceed, permit me to express my appreciation and thanks to the Pan American Health Organization, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Inter-American Development Bank, and the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean for their efforts in bringing this special session to fruition. Having said that, I am honored to open this panel discussion with the initial presentation by Dr. Carissa Etienne. As we all know, Dr. Etienne is the director of the Pan American Health Organization. She was elected for a second 5-year term in 2017. Dr. Etienne is a lifelong champion and crusader for primary health care as a driver for equity in health and development. She's a native of Dominica. Dr. Etienne received her medical degree from the University of the West Indies in Jamaica, and her Master of Science degree was earned in Community Health in Developing Countries from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine in the University of London in the United Kingdom. Dr. Etienne, welcome back to the OAS Permanent Council. It is my distinct honor and a privilege to offer you the floor.
And I take it you can hear me?
I can indeed.
Thank you very much. So, Honorable Ambassador Dr. Everson Hall, Chair of the Permanent Council, honorable members of the Permanent Council and associated members, Assistant Secretary General Mr. Nestor Mendez, ladies and gentlemen and distinguished guests, let me thank you, Ambassador, for inviting me to share an update on the COVID-19 pandemic in the region of the Americas. I can't help but state that we meet here today under the cloud of fractured peace in Europe, which threatens peace and stability across the world. We pray for peace and strive for justice for all peoples. Today, I'm also grateful to be among like-minded leaders who understand the interdependence between our health, our economies, and our societies. Let me congratulate the Organization of American States for the adoption of an important resolution at the November 2021 General Assembly on the developments in the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on the hemisphere. A lot has changed since the last time we were together in September of 2021. Over the last few months, countries throughout the Americas have felt the impact of a new, more infectious variant. Omicron's arrival coincided with holidays and cultural celebrations throughout our region that created a perfect environment for COVID to spread as people gathered, traveled, and met indoors, often unmasked. Countries reached new infection peaks, and across every corner of the Americas, emergency room visits, hospitalization, and deaths also surged. Just 2 months into 2022, the Americas have already reported more than 40 million COVID cases and more than 184,000 COVID-related deaths. That means that we've already lost more people to COVID this year than the entire population of St. Lucia. And we've seen more infections than there are people in Peru. Indeed, in the first 6 weeks of this year, up to 202 people died every hour in the Americas from COVID-19. These figures are shocking and a reminder that we cannot afford to be complacent in the face of this ever-changing virus. And the good news is that thanks to the protective power of vaccines, COVID deaths are dropping. This underscores the importance of expanding access to vaccines, including boosters, where available, to save lives. And thanks to the hard-earned efforts of countries throughout the Americas and the generous support of donors like the United States of America, Canada, and Spain that helped our region secure doses when supply was limited, 65% of people across Latin America and the Caribbean have been fully vaccinated against COVID-19. So today, the region has some of the highest COVID-19 vaccination coverage in the world. But there are also serious gaps in vaccine coverage, and some countries are being left behind. In the Caribbean, while the Cayman Islands has protected more than 90% of its population with COVID vaccines, less than 1% of people in Haiti have been immunized. As we strive to reach the WHO goal of vaccinating 70% of the population in every country by July 2022, 13 of our countries in the region have yet to reach 40% coverage. And 10 of these countries are in the Caribbean. More than 1 in 4 people across the Americas have yet to receive a single dose of protection. And if we zoom in on low and middle income countries in our region, more than half of people have yet to receive a single COVID-19 vaccine. And we are also facing serious challenges of vaccine hesitancy in some countries that have ready access to vaccines. But there is a trend that we are seeing now in the evolution of the COVID-19 pandemic that is characterized by a continuing decline in cases and deaths across all the 4 subregions. Last week, there were 2.2 million new COVID cases in the region, a 28% decline as compared to the previous week. After 6 consecutive weeks of increases, we are now seeing deaths fall for the first time since the beginning of the Omicron wave. Deaths have fallen to 29,000 new deaths reported in our region, a drop of 9%. However, many places are still facing the crest of the infection surge. So we must stay vigilant and uphold the measures that have been proven to save lives. We are not out of the woods yet. All of us in this virtual room are looking for answers as to how can we get back to normal? How can you get people back to their jobs? How can we give families the assurance of safety in schools and family gatherings? The first 2 years of the response have clearly shown that investments in pandemic preparedness are critical in the management of a pandemic response. It has also shown that an integrated response across sectors can be highly complex and requires permanent adjustment of existing strategies, as well as the adoption of new validated evidence-based tools. But I think it is important that we continue to ask ourselves, how did we get there in the first place? And it is inequality that has allowed the Americas to experience more COVID deaths than anywhere else, and to lose more progress, whether that's in health, the economy, or education, than our neighbors. We must address those inequalities to build more prosperous economies, healthier communities, and resilient societies. So I think we have again an opportunity to address some of these key points that were raised in last year's General Assembly's resolution on COVID-19 at the 9th Summit of the Americas. And PAHO's work has already begun with the member states, the OAS, and the host country, the United States, to operationalize the summit's proposed action plan on health and resilience in the Americas. PAHO is highlighting priority proposals that fit well within the summit's action plan on health and resilience, and which are essential for the region's recovery. The first priority is resilience through preparedness, ensuring that all countries and territories in the Americas have the capacity to detect, alert, and respond to health emergencies is paramount to overcome the current crisis and prevent and control future pandemics. PAHO has helped build a robust and innovative surveillance network that enables us to keep a close eye on how this virus is evolving. And this is going to be important now and into the future. So today, the Regional Genomic Surveillance Network for SARS-CoV-2 is supporting countries to identify the emergence and spread of COVID-19 variants. And in the next few months, we will work to expand the capacity for genomic surveillance within countries. We've also developed a modeling tool that tracks cases, forecasts trends, and helps countries measure the impact of different public health measures to inform their responses. Countries need to continue leveraging these resources and to prioritize investments in health surveillance to get us through this pandemic and to be better able to prepare us for what lies ahead. The second priority I want to highlight is the resilience in health technology and medical product manufacturing capacity and supply. Latin America and the Caribbean depend almost entirely on other regions to produce the raw pharmaceutical materials, medicines, vaccines, and other health technologies that our population needs to stay healthy. Increasing regional production of medical products is a priority to address the glaring gaps in access to COVID-19 vaccines, but other medicines, lab supplies, equipment, and other essential supplies. So in this regard, PAHO is advancing the work on the regional platform for the mRNA vaccine technology and collaborating with other partners to expand capacity for innovation and the sustainable production of vaccines, medicines, and other health technology to benefit all countries in the region. And this is very important in a spirit of regional integration, regional sufficiency, and solidarity. Our region has the building blocks to make it happen. Strong academic institutions, existing manufacturing capacity, robust regulatory systems, and a strong history of cooperation. But for this to work, we need sustained financial and political commitment. And finally, the third priority is resilient health systems and societies. Few countries invest as much in their health systems as they should, leaving them prone to shortages in health personnel and essential supplies as well as to weak public health systems. We need countries to mobilize funds and invest the recommended 6% of GDP into their health systems to keep people safe and healthy and to channel those resources effectively where needed the most. And in the light of COVID, this is like an insurance mechanism to ensure that we remain fit for economic development. Prioritizing health means hiring and training enough health workers to make COVID care available to all while maintaining services for other health programs and types of care. It requires absolutely that we strengthen primary health care and the first level of care to deliver quality, effective service for essential health programs and for COVID. It means making healthcare more accessible to the poorest and the most vulnerable, since nearly 30% of people in our region could not access health services well prior to COVID because of who they are, where they live, or because the cost is simply too high. Across all of these priorities, we also need greater dialogue between health and finance institutions, industry partners, and civil society, so that decisions affecting our health systems reflect the national expertise and that our health policies are transparent, harmonized, and efficient. PAHO has been working to ensure that the region is prepared for the transitioning from pandemic to an endemic situation, to ensuring better preparedness for the future, and to accelerating the agenda of the SDGs, universal health and well-being for all. Before closing, I want to recognize the tremendous efforts of all countries in our region to respond to this enormous challenge. Every day gives us the opportunity to work more closely together, building on our individual strengths to collectively limit the impact of this pandemic. As we continue to fight this virus, we must do more than just stop COVID-19. We must commit to building a fairer, healthier world. That means ensuring our region is more resilient and better prepared to tackle the next challenge, while redoubling our efforts to achieve the promise of health for all. I look forward to joining future meetings of the Permanent Council and certainly the Joint Summit Working Group so we can put forth a unified vision at the upcoming Summit of the Americas. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Over.
In the formative presentation, you have provided much food for thought and also much food for concern. I think that you've outlined a very carefully defined roadmap going ahead to be pursued, and I expect that it will be pursued as diligently as you've presented it to us. I am now pleased to offer the floor to Dr. Michelle Wolf, who will share with us the current stage of the pandemic in the United States, efforts to strengthen public health systems to prevent, detect, and respond to future pandemics, as well as any lessons that can be learned from the current crisis to better help our nations prepare for the future. Dr. Wolf is CDC's Chief Medical Officer. In this role, he has provided support for the CDC Director and interacts with key public health partners, the United States Congress, the White House, and other government and public health officials. In addition, he leads the development of objectives and planning for CDC's global health strategy, footprint, and budget. Dr. Wolf joined the CDC as an Epidemic Intelligence Service Officer with the National Center for Environmental Health, leading investigations on infectious disease mortality, heat-related mortality, and exposures to heavy metals related to a large forest fire. He earned his medical degree from the University of Vermont, his Master of Public Health degree from the University of California at Berkeley, and his undergraduate degree from the University of California at Santa Barbara. He has an American board certification in general preventive medicine and public health. And in 2020, he retired from the commissioned Corps for the United States Public Health Service at the rank of Rear Admiral. Dr. Wolf, welcome to the OAS Permanent Council. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Hall. I just want to make sure you can all hear me.
Certainly can.
Great. Well, thank you, Ambassador Hall and Dr. Etienne and all the dignitaries and distinguished guests that are present today. I'd like to start off by thanking you for inviting me to this discussion with my fellow panelists. We're really at an unprecedented time for all of us, and it's an honor for me to be able to speak to you today and be part of the discussion. I wanted to start by briefly speaking about the current state of the pandemic in the U.S. and its implications for the U.S. domestic public health strategy. And then I'll speak about CDC's activities globally for fighting COVID-19 and strengthening global health security for the future. So as of February 24th, we have seen more than 78 million cases of COVID-19 and over 936,000 deaths across the US during this pandemic, with approximately 2,200 deaths every day in the US alone. COVID continues to have an unacceptably heavy toll. But there is reason for optimism. Cases in the US and in most of the world are decreasing, and the risk of disease, hospitalization, and death is reduced with the Omicron variant, especially among people who are up to date on their COVID vaccine. Our best tool continues to be vaccine and boosters. We are looking at vaccine effectiveness against hospitalizations with both the Delta and Omicron variants. CDC recently published data showing that for both variants, there was a decline in vaccine effectiveness against hospitalization with just the primary series. But following a third dose or a booster dose, vaccine effectiveness against hospitalization increased, reaching 90% against the Omicron variant. Overall, those who received a booster dose had the most protection against emergency room visits, urgent care clinic visits, and hospitalizations. Just last week, we published data on the importance of COVID-19 vaccination among pregnant people, showing that there's a 60% reduction in COVID-19 hospitalization in babies younger than 6 months if their parent is vaccinated during pregnancy. It's critical at this point that we both respond to the current pandemic and plan for the future. Going forward, we all need to work together to build a stronger and more resilient public health system. As we know, and this pandemic has shown, we're all interconnected, and a health threat anywhere is a health threat everywhere. So it's critical that we all work together. And to do this, we must focus in a number of areas. Strengthening our public health workforce, preparing for future health threats, both global and domestic, strengthening our public health laboratory infrastructure, modernizing our data systems, and addressing health equity in all that we do. Just as the pandemic has exacerbated public health issues, it has also exposed weaknesses in our public health infrastructure and stretched that infrastructure to its limits. In the US, we've seen the impact of the chronic underfunding of the public health system at the local, state, federal, tribal, and territorial levels. The pandemic has also showed us the hard truth about health equity in the US, that in marginalized communities, they have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. And more clearly than ever before, we have come to understand the real inseparability of socioeconomic conditions and the well-being of the public. With a $7.4 billion investment in the American Rescue Plan in our domestic public health infrastructure, we now have the chance to build a stronger and more resilient public health system for the future and make sure that the need for health equity informs everything that we do. We've created a new Center for Forecasting and Outbreak Analytics to provide pandemic forecasting and modeling of threats to the public. And we have dramatically strengthened our capacity to do genomic sequencing and collaborating and cooperating on forecasting and sequencing is something that I think there's a real opportunity for in the Western Hemisphere and in our region. With billions of dollars in new funding, we've begun to strengthen and modernize our data, public health laboratory, and emergency preparedness systems. The COVID-19 pandemic has made clear that we need to nurture the next generation of infectious disease epidemiologists, laboratorians, and providers. Investments in this important area are increasing, but we still have a lot of work ahead of us. CDC has also proposed initiatives that will help streamline data modernization and laboratory innovation and advance molecular detection and genomic sequencing. And all of these are very important, not just for us, but for all countries. So I'd like to talk just for a minute about CDC's work with other countries. CDC's activities to address health threats extend far beyond the US. Since the beginning of this century, the world has experienced major outbreaks from SARS and H1N1, Ebola, Zika, and now SARS-CoV-2. CDC has worked with other countries and with WHO and closely with PAHO to respond to hundreds of outbreaks around the world every year, some that make global news and many that nobody ever hears about, which is good news. Many are controlled before they become an epidemic or a pandemic. We've worked for over 70 years overseas, and currently we have almost 2,000 staff in over 60 countries worldwide, working with other countries to address health threats, and that's a core part of our mission. We work very closely with ministries of health, with WHO, with PAHO, and other partners around the world on disease surveillance and outbreak activities, emergency management, including the development of emergency operations centers, safe laboratory systems and diagnostics, and developing a workforce including training frontline responders, laboratorians, disease detectives, emergency managers, and other public health professionals who are responsible for taking the lead when crises happen. Some of the main pillars of our global health security work included enhancing national public health institutes as part of a sustainable public health system. These institutes, which we also call NPHIs, National Public Health Institutes, serve as a home for countries' public health activities by bringing surveillance, laboratory, emergency management, and public health workforce and research all under one roof. We also collaborate with countries to develop sustainable public health workforce. CDC's Field Epidemiology Program, or FETP, focuses on training a global workforce of field epidemiologists or disease detectives who respond to outbreaks and lead public health responses. Since 1980, this program has worked with more than 80 countries who have trained more than 19,000 graduates, and these trained professionals have been leaders in outbreak response around the world for countries for many outbreaks, including polio, Ebola, Zika, yellow fever, and COVID. At this point, I just want to acknowledge what Dr. Etienne reported regarding vaccine and vaccine rates in the region. This is a major accomplishment, and I want to congratulate all countries for the extremely hard work to get this far for vaccinating the population. It's clear, as she pointed out, that there is existing gaps, and regarding those gaps, CDC is currently providing technical assistance to many countries around the world and happy to discuss the potential for additional technical collaboration. CDC is also strengthening our overseas work to be more sustainable with a long-term vision. And as part of this, in addition to our country offices, we've established 4 regional offices in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East, North Africa, in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and in South America. Our current South America regional office was launched in 2020. It's headquartered in Brasilia, Brazil, but I want to be clear that it works with countries across South America. And we are also looking at establishing a regional office for Central America and the Caribbean. The mission of the regional office is to provide leadership on global public health strategies and apply CDC's abilities and resources to strengthen disease prevention, detection, and response efforts throughout the region, and collaborate with partner organizations, governments, and donors, and USG agency representatives in the field. I want to talk for a minute about lessons learned from this pandemic. There are many lessons, and I can't possibly run through all of them, but I do want to highlight a few, and would be happy to discuss this further during the question and answer period today. First, we need to be able to detect and respond to future pathogens better. To do this, we need to effectively collaborate in disease surveillance in areas like genomic sequencing and sample sharing and building infrastructure. We shouldn't all have to build infrastructure from scratch every time there's a global threat. So it's essential that we build off of and expand the collaborative infrastructure that we've already developed to work on COVID. Second, we've seen the importance of building on existing efforts when responding to an emergency. For example, we've built on existing platforms that were developed under some of our PEPFAR activities to facilitate vaccine distribution. And we've learned to do a lot virtually, and that's going to impact the way that we all work going forward. We've managed not just webinars, but virtual infection prevention and control assessments, virtual wet lab trainings, and virtual deployments. So the future of virtual collaboration is probably just at its early stages, and it's exciting to think about how this could be developed further. It's critical that when we respond to a pandemic, we protect vital public health programs like routine immunization, polio, and measles, and other programs that save lives, so there are not unintended mortality and morbidity effects from a pandemic. And finally, the pandemic has had enormous influence on the supply of vaccine tests and reagents. And as Dr. Etienne brought up, the world is looking at options for more diverse manufacturing capacity to help the world be more resilient to these stresses. So to wrap up, I would just say this pandemic has shown us the interconnectedness of the world and of all of us, and the importance of all of us working together, because a health threat anywhere is a health threat everywhere. And with that, I want to thank you for inviting me again to this discussion, and I'm looking forward to questions and answers.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wolf. Your presentation was most comprehensive, and it was deep and very, very interesting. I was particularly intrigued by the approach that you're taking with respect to expanding the work in the empirical area, particularly as it relates to forecasting. That happens to be a specialized area of mine, having been trained in econometrics. And so I'm delighted to hear that. And also related to that is the reach that you're going to be undertaking to reach closer to the Caribbean region. That is, of course, of special significance to us. In relation to the Caribbean, of course, I also would not, it's very important for me to actually reference your fascination with Alexander Hamilton. He happens to be born in Nevis, my place of origin, and that matters a great deal. As many of you know, he left Nevis some time ago, but rose to the level of being the first Secretary of the U.S. Treasury, serving under Alexander Hamilton. And as many of you have in your pockets right now, you have a $10 bill, and on that face you'll see a photo of Alexander Hamilton. So it's good to know that. So thank you again, and look forward to hearing the comments additional comments that you offer during the question and answer period. I am now pleased to offer the floor to Dr. Camilla Sid, Social Affairs Officer at the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, who will share with us both the socioeconomic effects of the pandemic on the region, as well as the outlook for Latin America and the Caribbean as we endeavor to strengthen our health and economic architecture and pursue a more sustainable and inclusive path to the development in our post-pandemic recovery efforts. Dr. Sid is a Social Affairs Officer / Technical Advisor for ECLAC. He's an economist with a master's degree in economics from Georgetown University and a PhD in economics from the Universität Duisburg-Essen in Germany. He was previously the regional advisor on health economics and financing at PAHO in Washington, D.C. In his native country, Chile, for nearly 2 decades, he held various positions in the public and academic spheres. Dr. Sid, welcome to the OAS Permanent Council. You have the floor, sir.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, Chair of this Permanent Council. Allow me to thank the Assistant Secretary General and the Secretary General. I'd like to also acknowledge Dr. Etienne, head of PAHO, ambassadors, and colleagues. I would like to discuss these issues based on what was recently published by ECLAC, which has to do with the social situation in Latin America. And this is from 2021, and it focuses on the impact of the pandemic and its impact on the social reality in our countries. There are a few key takeaways that we hope people can gather from the report. And essentially, it talks about what has happened given what was first a health emergency that turned into a prolonged social crisis with economic impact, and also something that has hit at the core of our societies, which is the health and the wellness of the people in our region. And it also has had a structural impact on the systems that provide health care. It is characterized also by a huge impact on women and young people and informal workers when it comes to their job opportunities. Also, a mass exodus of women from the workforce. Also, a lot of women impacted who handle primarily the care work that happens at home. Also, the impact on poverty and inequality, and also doing away with the great trends we had seen in Latin America and the Caribbean since 2002. This is also part of a crisis that has been called the silent education crisis, with an impact on young people and on children, which has also hurt the wallets of everyone in our community. Also in 2021, we saw that in the region there was a 6.2% growth in GDP on average, but it wasn't enough to address the work and social impact of the pandemic. As a matter of fact, there has been an increase in extreme poverty despite the economic growth. Countries have all taken steps to respond through social spending and health spending, and also in emergency transfers and direct payments, and to address the blow on the labor market. The measures that have been implemented need to remain in place until the end of the crisis. ECLAC believes that when it comes to solutions and outlook and recommendations, there need to be more explicit details given on what countries are going to continue to do. Of course, there is not going to be any social or economic recovery without getting a handle on the health crisis. And therefore, there is a need for new social, fiscal, and political agreements that can allow for financial sustainability and also provide universal health care. In that regard, and given this report, we believe that the pandemic can actually become a historic opportunity to ensure that social protection can be enhanced as well, with a universal, integral, sustainable, and resilient approaches being the main categories of what they embody. Assessing the impact that people have seen on their health and the healthcare systems is going to be important as well. Dr. Etienne, I think, already shared a lot of information on this. But I should say that the overrepresentation we've seen from Latin America and the Caribbean in terms of deaths and cases of infection in our population, we have about 2.4% of deaths per 100,000 inhabitants, which is the highest, one of the highest in the world. Also, in Latin America and the Caribbean, 30% of all deaths from the disease around the world are in our region. And that's for a population that only accounts for 8.4% of the total population. Infections. These are confirmed cases. They've been between 18 and 20% of the global population coming from Latin America and the Caribbean, once again compared to the 8.4% of the total global population our region represents. And so in that regard, being clear on the fact that the key tool to come out of this crisis and to mitigate all this is vaccines. it is important to understand that alongside the optimism, given the great effort the region has done to increase the vaccine rates in many countries, we should also be aware of what needs to be done. As Dr. Tien mentioned, by getting to 70% of total population in each of our countries vaccinated, that would be a huge step forward. Over 30% of the countries in our region are yet to reach the 70% vaccinated rate. It essentially shows us this big gap throughout the hemisphere. The latest numbers included in the report were 62% of the population that was fully vaccinated. And in the Caribbean, that's just above 35%, according to the numbers, which means that there are significant gaps that need to be addressed. And it's also important to think about what Dr. Etienne mentioned when it comes to the need to see that healthcare is part of a complex economic apparatus that requires a number of different inputs in order to get the job done, medical supplies as well as other elements in order to fully address this issue. Therefore, PAHO's plans and plans from other organizations and CELAC's plans as well, which has asked for a self-sufficiency plan from ECLAC for addressing healthcare. All of that is important and moves in the same direction. The health impact has been absolutely huge during the pandemic. As we have mentioned, that has been the case as well for diseases that are different to COVID-19. For example, the displacement effect. In this report, we highlight some key aspects. For example, how some acute diseases have been pushed out of some hospitals but still remain. In Peru, for example, the admission rates for heart attacks dropped by almost half because of COVID. Also in Ecuador, there was a 37% drop in people who were treated for cancer because the beds were taken up by COVID. And this all has an impact on mortality and the kind of high death rates that we see during the pandemic. We also saw that in the region, there was an important amount of people who didn't have access to healthcare during 2020 because of COVID. According to reports from the WHO that came from the disruption survey, we see that 30% of countries reported major disruptions, 65% of disruptions coming from primary healthcare. It's important to go for systemic changes in the healthcare sector because of everything we have been seeing. In addition to the issues having to do with access to healthcare, which is a long-term problem, we can also address the other structural issues that have been highlighted. For example, the chronic underfinancing of healthcare systems, the fragmentation and segmentation that we've seen in the healthcare. We see that on average, these numbers don't even reach 4% of health spending in the region. And there is also the direct out-of-pocket costs from households. That is another parallel issue that affects healthcare in the region. This is something that limits access, but also is one of the factors that leads households into falling deeper into poverty, as it has been reported. When it comes to the SDGs and how to continue to achieve better health care. We know that there are different systems that provide different services across the healthcare spectrum, but the results are the same. There is inequality. There is a fragmented healthcare. There is not the same amount of funding that goes into the different aspects of the system. There is a lack of key resources in the system, including human resources and infrastructure capacity. Now, I would like to delve deeper into poverty and inequality and labor markets. The report highlights a major setback, 27-year setback in the increase in extreme poverty in 2021. In 2020, poverty increased from 30 to 33% in the region, and extreme poverty also went from 11 to 13%. In 2021, despite economic growth, extreme poverty did not drop. As a matter of fact, it went up. with 86 million people in the region who are currently suffering from this degree of poverty. But in addition to this, like everything else in the region, poverty also has within it inequality. In rural areas, 45% of the population is currently living in poverty. When it comes to children from 0 to 14 years old, there is a 47% of that segment of the population living in poverty, which is significantly higher than those 65 and older. Indigenous peoples and Black communities in close to half of those communities are living in poverty in Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, in terms of education, also those with lower education have a poverty level that is 5 times that of those who have higher education and who are heads of household. Therefore, because of all of this, and when we look at household income and income of those who have been surveyed, we see that those who are living in poverty are impacted even higher because of their socioeconomic status, and that all fuels inequality. We've seen the impact it has had on the Gini coefficient in 2020. Given the uneven reduction in income in households, we also can see some of the different percentiles of the population have been significantly impacted, which all leads us to look at the big millionaire classes in the region where, on average, a lot of the richest of people in the region had a 14% increase of their wealth, despite what was being suffered by others. Also, when it comes to the pre-pandemic employment levels, we see the differences. 50% of women continue to be shut out from the workforce in 2020. There was an 18-year setback in women's workforce participation. It was at 48% in 2002, and in 2020, we saw that number once again. Projected into 2022, there is expected to be an improvement in employment, but it is uneven still. Men are expected to more quickly recover jobs than women. That being said, countries have taken steps, and this is an important way to come into this final point I want to make. There has been a response, and it has led to mitigation and actually relieving poverty. Despite the 2021 economic growth, and that was about 4% of per capita GDP, poverty was still a huge factor. A lot of the improvements that we saw in people's income actually came from direct payment from government. There were 168 different emergency direct government payment measures taken with 136 million people in many countries who got some sort of government assistance, emergency assistance through direct payments in 2021. That being said, in 2020, there were about $90 billion in government transfers. That dropped to $45 billion. That's about half in 2021. The recommendation that we're issuing as ECLAC is to actually keep these direct payments high to prevent the more significant impact we've seen in poverty, and particularly for more vulnerable groups. Social spending increased significantly by 2.3 percentage points of GDP on average in the region. And this was also an increase that we saw in these emergency government transfers. This was the second highest percentage that we saw was in healthcare at 13%. And there are signs that everything is moving in the right direction, that it is mitigating the social impact. However, they still fall short. And some of the efforts may not necessarily be actually sustainable over time. Now, to wrap up, just want to say that under the recommendations that we're issuing as ECLAC, we're saying that having people fully vaccinated, at least 70% of the population, is absolutely vital, because that is what gives us that light at the end of the tunnel, actually being able to come out of this crisis. It is important to also take steps towards universal health care, as we heard from Pajo. to ensure that we can have general well-being in a way that reduces the racial inequality and the different kinds of inequality that we see across different categories, and move towards more sustainable growth. Having more resilient and sustainable systems for healthcare and for social benefits can allow for better nutrition and food security, quality, basic services, and quality services overall. And for all of this, there needs to be more progressive tax benefits and fiscal steps that can allow for better financial well-being for all. The well-being that is being promoted should not be seen as a finish line, but rather as a sine qua non, so that the region can have more sustainable models for consumption and for production. These are new economic models that lead to more social cohesion and that are also respectful and friendly to the environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sid, for your most informative presentation. I should respond almost immediately by taking my hat off to the outstanding work that's been done by ECLA in compiling this data and presenting this performance indicator. One particular index that you mentioned was the 27-year drop in poverty, a fairly sustained drop. This is very similar to the data that we're seeing coming out of ECLA with respect to the productivity rates, which actually have been declining at a fairly steady pace over the past 28 years. And indeed, we had a seminar on the February 9th, which actually tried to address this issue. So it is one that I think that is of paramount importance, and it's very, very important and very pleasing to me to hear that, that you're finding essentially the same kind of drop with respect to the poverty rates. And of course, that has most important implications for the health services sector. Thank you very much again, sir. I am now pleased to offer the floor to Dr. Benigno Lopez Benitez. He's the Vice President for Sectors and Knowledge at the Inter-American Development Bank. The IDB has been a valuable and strategic regional partner, particularly through this pandemic. As our countries look towards a post-pandemic recovery, his presentation will highlight the IDB's plans for investment in the region, strengthening health systems, and building a stronger socioeconomic architecture that will help our nations to avert another lost decade. Mr. Lopez Benitez, a Paraguayan citizen, was appointed Vice President for Sectors and Knowledge at the Inter-American Development Bank. That occurred on November 16, 2020. Prior to joining the IDB, he served as Minister of Finance of Paraguay. From 2014 to 2018, he served as Chairman of the Social Security Institute of Paraguay. He has a wealth of experience in both the public and private sectors in areas involving public and administrative law, banking law, and international law. He holds a law degree from Paraguay Catholic University and a Master of Law degree from Georgetown University. Vice President Lopez Benitez, welcome to the OAS Permanent Council. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Hall, for your invitation to participate in this important event. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Lo normal nos llevó a esto, escribió Ed John, periodista.
In 2020, Ed John from Atlanta wrote, "This is what normal has brought us, and I cannot imagine how well or how much better the current situation could be described." And as those who have spoken before me, I believe have said as much. This isn't fortuitous. This is a region that has an increasing level of chronic disease. About 70% of the deaths of the region come from chronic disease. That's number one. Number two, our expenditure in public health is insufficient. About 3.5% of GDP, which is half what the OECD countries spend. And what can I say about the quality of health services for the most vulnerable? 70% of avoidable deaths, therefore, come from issues writ large that have to do with health, some of which I pointed out here. When COVID-19 burst upon us, we understood that it was not just a health issue, it was a question of society in general and many different sectors therein. First of all, essential services were broken up. According to the World Health Organization, 75% of the countries of the region reported interruptions in the primary level of health, 20% in emergency service, still within the health sector. Preventive health, that dropped off the map virtually. There were drops in that sector of up to 60%, including the screening for uterine cancer, even including women at high risk. Chronic disease patients have not gotten the attention they deserved and needed. And so ongoing health of the patients has been neglected, and certainly there will be an increase in cost as we move forward. And we know as a result of the pandemic, those health costs are going to skyrocket. What will it lead to? Interruption of service. On the economics front, we had about 7% drop in GDP in 2020. That's twice the level at the world level, which was about 3.5, give or take, GDP, I say worldwide. 5 million people dropped into extreme poverty. About 40 million jobs were lost. You add it up. If we take an overall view at this, we have lost 27 years of our fight against poverty. That's what it boils down to. 137 days compared to 118 days lost in the rest of the world. This has led not only to fewer kids at school, that translates into about a half year to a whole year of schooling. Another result of the pandemic tells us that socioeconomic levels, students will have certainly be suffering a broadening gap in their learning, about 2.5 years more than those at a higher income level. We cannot sit by and let inequality yawn ever larger, particularly among children with very few sources to begin with. The Inter-American Development Bank, therefore, set forth a roadmap, or 2025 vision, to try to mitigate all of this with sustainability, inclusion, and resilience. We know where we're going. We want to avoid another lost decade in Latin America and the Caribbean with integral solutions. What are a couple of the actions we've taken? Well, we offered $1 billion to 11 countries in the region to try to fight the outfall of COVID. 1.4 million to monetary transfers in 14 countries, targeting the most vulnerable. We adopted new processes. We came up with new ways to do business, increasing resilience among our counterparts. And that has led us to come up with $291 million that we have taken from other projects and that we have siphoned off to COVID. We felt that was important. Our emergency credit facility has also been useful. We've come up with innovative subjects like the guarantee against the outfall of vaccination in the region, any secondary effects. We're ready to help countries to shore up their health systems and make them more resilient. Let me point out a couple of objectives. Number one, ongoing management of vaccine, the establishment of essential services, and necessary preparation to face future public health emergencies. That was the first point. Second, we want to move forward toward universal health coverage. To that end, the access, the equity, and the ease of services is critical. We have sought to boost primary health services, improve the infrastructure. We promise to redouble our efforts to increase our institutional governance, institutional capacity, and governance in general. Thirdly, we want to increase the efficiency in expenditure in health, such as, for instance, ensure that health policies aim for prevention Aim for more cost-effective drugs. Aim for easier payment to providers and better access to health facilities. Fourthly, we seek to strengthen the epidemiological surveillance and the use of services through telemedicine, better communication, better available and trustworthy data for decision taking, and to that end, need I say it, the cyber technology improvements will be essential. This has to be easy, it has to be flexible. Fifth, better integration at the regional level in Latin America and the Caribbean, particularly through investments in mitigation and development, increasing regional capacity for the production of vaccinations, increasing essential technology. And lastly, improve our public-private cooperation. It is essential that the sectors cooperate better with each other to really offer, if we're serious, better quality services. Everything involved with investigation in the research of health technology will, I believe, do the trick. Let me close by saying, as I began, if what is normal brought us where we are, the question must be, is it not? How do we do better? Let us surely not go back to life as usual, to business as usual, not what's normal, but what is going to make the difference so that there's a priority on health priorities, particularly for the most vulnerable. We will be here to help the countries to do just that, with a clear vision that we've set forth and hand in hand with our partners in Latin America. You can rely on the Inter-American Development Bank to move this region forward. Thank you.
I was particularly impressed with the transfer that have occurred in transferring $291 million from other projects to fund the challenges that are being faced in the healthcare area. Now, distinguished ladies and the floor is now open for participation by the member states, but I'd like to establish an priority order here. I would like for the ambassador for Ukraine to be the first presenter after the member states have presented. So I'd like to open the floor now to the member states, and I'd like to urge you to stay within the constraints that we've established and limit your contributions to no more than 5 minutes. Thank you very much. You have the floor, please. Let's see. First, we have Ecuador. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, distinguished ambassadors, and a particularly warm greeting to Dr. Carissa Etienne and the other dignitaries that honor us with their presence here today. I think that the issue that we are dealing with at this very moment could not be more timely, since the pandemic has really tested us all, is testing us all, I should say, testing our resilience, testing our capacity, and Ecuador has surely not been an exception to that challenge. We have met that challenge head on with an integral approach, a participatory approach, and one that it has been bought into at all of the levels of the country from an intersectoral standpoint. We're talking an integral response that has been based in our Phoenix Center, and that, of course, was launched with a very successful vaccination plan, I'm happy to say. We are now vaccinating children from 3 years onward, and by the way, we have 87% coverage for the first dose, 84% for the second dose, and 25% for the booster. So that's where we stand. Now, you understand, too, this could not have happened if it hadn't been a broad-based social movement. That's what we have to say. A host of social actors across the board have understood what the what the challenge was. Universities, academic centers have participated not only through their professors and students who have stepped forward to be doing the vaccinating, but also certainly with the help of the labs, of the diagnostic capacity in the country, the townships in the country. 221 mobilized townships across the country, even though and regardless of political positions. Party affiliation has not made a difference here. And the availability of syringes, of the space in which the professionals could work, and even from a technology standpoint, the electoral system in the country has offered the basis on which this was made possible. And by the way, the armed services were not behind. They helped us get to the farthest flung areas of the world. This shows us that you can work together when one is focused so to do. And we were particularly active in community vigilance, community surveillance, in the sense that we wanted to be very sure, as the doctor from CDC has said, that people were being monitored because, as we all know, COVID certainly displaced, as it were, chronic disease patients. And where were they to go? And by the way, 20% increase in maternal deaths through the pandemic, 20%. So it was obvious that we needed, as a matter of urgency, to strengthen hospital capacity and reorganize the health system, particularly from the standpoint of laboratory diagnosis, the production of local biological through the labs. Certainly, PAHO, the United Nations, the various countries in the region have helped immensely in making that possible. And by the way, our border work with Colombia and Peru has made a big difference as well. And this has translated into a difference, particularly for a population like Venezuela that is, shall I say, in transit, that are in a particularly vulnerable situation. We have understood that this was an opportunity that we had to seize, not just to face the moment, but to make it a springboard for overarching, more permanent change in our health system. We're looking at a new health model. That's what we're looking at. We are, from top to bottom, reformulating our health system with the particular accents on equity, participation, intersectorality, and modernity. I think that we could not miss this opportunity to look to the future and make it a better one by what we're doing today. Thank you.
Ambassador Issachar, you have the floor, sir.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to commend you and commend the presence of Dr. Etienne and other distinguished visitors. Let me begin by very much thanking Dr. Carissa Etienne, Dr. Wolf, Mr. Lopez. It has been almost 3 years since COVID befell us in Chile. And since then, we have been continually seeking a way to do better in this region, which, as we know, is one of the most affected. The government of Chile met that challenge head on through immediate changes in our health section. And this has led us to launch one of the most successful campaigns, vaccination campaigns in the world, 99% for above 28, and including at lower age groups, one of the best in the world. This has led to certainly the need to professionals in health from all levels together with the population to work more closely together and make that difference. Now, despite the efforts that our government has carried out, we do understand, alas, that the pandemic is still with us. It's not over. Chile understood from the start that the best way to go forward was certainly to act collectively. And that is what we have sought to do using international tools made available and our own efforts here. Chile called out for an international instrument for us to be able to move forward, and we will be using this new approach with the help of the World Health Organization starting in March, just around the corner. This will help us better prepare for and respond to such challenges as this. And certainly PAHO is a great part of that. Chair, thank you very much for this opportunity. And again, kudos to the Pan American Health Organization and the stellar quality of the leadership of Dr. Carissa Etienne. And as she has rightly said, the manner in which all of us together will be able to address this matter at the coming summit in the Americas. Capacity is important, and consolidation of a resilient health system is too. That's why we think it's most pertinent for us to understand how important it is to better handle medical support from other parts of the world. We have a good public-private participation, by the way, and the supply chain of medical items is going to improve, but we're looking at it. We're setting up a coverage center for COVID investigation, research center for respiratory illnesses, and we think that will be a big step forward in helping this region be a little more autonomous in that drug supply chain. At this stage of the pandemic, I think we can only but continue to strengthen our health systems, keep improving the vaccination coverage. We must redouble our efforts to do better on the scientific level and to try to convince those who are anti-vax to think better and to be better able to detect the ambient fake news. We have to seek a consolidated front from the public-private side, and we believe that this and this alone will help us and help our citizens move forward. This is a chance for us to understand that minimum standards of health coverage, as it happens, as it exists in developed countries, should be a sine qua non here. And none of that will be enough. It will all fall short if our health policies are not conversant in the broad sense of the term with the policies of our immediate neighbors. We don't live in isolated borders. We must come forward with a joint and effective response to the pandemic. Thank you.
The Alexandra Solano, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Buenos días a todos y a todas. Costa Rica agradece esta oportunidad para sostener una conversación sobre un tema que nos aqueja desde hace más de 2 años.
Thank you very much. Costa Rica is grateful for this opportunity to discuss a matter that has bedeviled us for the last 2 years. We continue facing the COVID-19 pandemic, understanding that this challenge rests on the very intense work that WHO and PAHO have been carrying out along with all of the international actors trying to make a difference, particularly assisting the more fragile economies so that all of us together are better able to face asymmetric negotiation systems. Costa Rica has a health system that exists since the 40s. That's last century, since the 1940s. And this has certainly made a big difference. We have a universal capital. We invest 25.39% of our GDP in the health sector, over a quarter. 95% of the population, therefore, is covered with medical insurance. We have also sought to improve institutional cooperation and our institutional response to ensure that the most vulnerable members of our society are not forgotten. More than 50 measures have been taken to boost health coverage in high vulnerable groups like children, women, the elderly, persons with disability, the indigenous, the homeless, and families in great poverty. We've also set up a technical interinstitutional roundtable to discuss the question of the dispersal of the COVID-19 vaccines. We're very much involved in the research and development of COVID-19 vaccines. COVAX facility has been a great help, and the decision-making process has also been very helpful as we have looked at this world pandemic and therapeutic positions taken there so that we can learn from others. Thanks to the work carried out, Costa Rica became the third country in Latin America to launch itself into vaccination, together with Mexico and Chile, by the way, sixth on the world level. 21st February of last year, we had 86.5% of our population covered of 5 years or more at the time with at least the first dose. 70.9% of that target population covered by the full vaccination scheme. For the population covering 58 years and older, which of course is the population at highest risk, the full coverage is over 96%. Vaccinated and boosted. Of the millions of doses that have been applied as of 21st February, 900 and some thousand, some 11% of the whole, have been offered foreigners in our country. And just as SARS-CoV-2 doesn't care what nationality you are, our health system doesn't either. 13% of the COVID-19 patients who have had to be hospitalized, even in intensive care units, are not Costa Rican. They are foreigners in this country, and we have taken care of them. This means, does it not, that measures are necessary not just nationally, but regionally, and this has to be multi-sectoral in approach. Vaccination should be considered a global good. All of these are imperatives, we believe, so that we can all pull forward. Surely, if this pandemic has shown us anything at all, and we all remember the single case that occurred at the other side of the world, it's that none of us is safe till we're all safe. We believe that the CTAP, through its common access to technology for against COVID-19, is important. We hope this CTAP will help us to serve as an umbrella as we seek to shield ourselves against future pandemics, the rotavirus, not to mention the social impact of transfer of technology and better know-how to be shared amongst all. So let me take this opportunity, Chair, to call out to everybody to share what we've got. The first support, of course, was carried out by the CSCE of Spain, the Superior Council on Scientific Research, and it offered to share the results it has so that the vaccine can be reproduced elsewhere. Costa Rica thinks that's a very good idea, and all countries that believe in this will manage to create a more resilient and more equitable future for the peoples of this hemisphere. Surely that is worthy of touting at the next Summit of the Americas. Health and resilience has to be a political commitment, and that goes straight to the issue we're discussing here under your leadership, Chair, today. Nobody should be left behind. Thank you.
Ambassador. Next, we have the presenter.
Thank you very much, Chair. The delegation of Panama is very grateful for this opportunity to discuss this issue. We are also very honored to have among us the distinguished panelists who have offered stirring statements, which we shall certainly remember. At the world scale, we know we're all facing enormous challenges, not just because of the very regrettable loss of life, but also as we understand that we don't have a choice but to revamp our health systems. And that's not going to just fall from the sky. Panama has increased and installed capacity for patients with COVID-19 through temporal hospitals. Campaign hospitals have worked also very hard on alternative sites. Homes, different shelters that were offered at the beginning of the pandemic, the registry of patients and the available of beds in the hospitals and in the ICUs were improved. We set up an emergency regulating center for better and more effective coordination precisely regarding the availability of beds and the transfer of desperately ill patients to where they could be helped. We launched several strategies, such as the appointment of health promoters to visit people's homes for increased epidemiological surveillance, particularly among vulnerable populations, the indigenous inter alia. Also, increasing our response capacity, our follow-up capacity, the installation of triage for respiratory problems, the use of artificial intelligence and digital advanced technology. We have taken strides to better inform and protect the population. More than 7 million doses, were about 90% of the available population, of whom women represent 51.3% of those who have been vaccinated. 3,600,000 and some children were vaccinated after the Panama campaign was launched. Particular attention being paid, of course, to those with chronic disease. Lessons learned must be recalled. And that we are attempting to do from the health ministry and others who are determined to work together to boost our resilience such that we may be better placed for future crises. We wish to ensure that our countries can really move towards sustainable development that is inclusive and equitable, placing a priority on the health of all of our citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We next have the Ambassador for Mexico. You have the floor.
Embajadora, no la escuchamos.
Very well. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate the presentations from experts. Multilateralism and international cooperation and effective cooperation are vital to finding common solutions to these challenges, like the ones that we are still facing almost 2 years in. During that time, Mexico has been absolutely key and a leader internationally, taking steps to address the pandemic. Among these has been the resolution in international cooperation to ensure global access to medication, vaccines, and all medical equipment needed to face the COVID-19 pandemic at the United Nations. Also, using multilateral instruments and mechanisms like COVAX, all of this has been absolutely key, and this includes CTAP as well. We're one of the founding members. Technical cooperation with PAHO, as well as a regional platform to advance vaccines for COVID-19 and other health technologies in the Americas, which was launched thanks to the Mexican initiative and included in Recommendation 158 of the Executive Committee at PAHO. Mexico has developed a diplomatic strategy that has given us 9 authorized vaccines, which essentially shows one of the most diverse portfolios, with almost 30% of doses being manufactured at home. Thanks to the implementation of agreements to develop biological instruments alongside other countries in the region, as we saw mainly with the collaboration of Argentina, we've been able to achieve all of this. Mexico had made available 201 million doses of vaccines from 7 labs: Pfizer Biotech, AstraZeneca, Sinovac, the National Epidemiological Research Center, Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, among others. We have also manufactured our own ventilators and is currently in very late stages of some of the other aspects of the response. As part of the COVID-19 response, the report from February 22nd at home highlights that 178 million doses have been issued since December 24th, 2020. That's a total of 85 million individuals who have been vaccinated. 93% of them, that is 78 million, are already fully vaccinated. On February 8th, Marcelo Ebrard, the foreign minister, mentioned that in February, Mexico is going to receive 18 million AstraZeneca doses through COVAX, which will bring us very close to the numbers that we're looking for our entire vaccine strategy. Mexico wishes to strongly urge and recall the United Nations to recognize the universal access necessary for all vaccines, to ensure there is universal access that is fair, transparent, equal, efficient, sustainable, and timely for vaccines and other medical supplies. That is the best way to more efficiently address this pandemic and also address future ones. Equal access must be at the heart of our recovery efforts. This is why my country took steps in solidarity when we were chairing CELAC and took on a common effort to combat COVID-19 through specialized briefings and through building strategic partnerships with international organizations, as well as by delivering vaccines and medical equipment and ventilators to different countries in the region. We would like to recognize the ICHR for initiatives like the implementation of the Coordination and Response Unit, which is part of the crisis response to address COVID-19. Also in July 2020, the adoption of Resolution 420, Human Rights of People with COVID-19, the passing in April 2021 of Resolution 121, Vaccines against COVID-19 under the Inter-American Human Rights Obligations. We bemoan the lack of ICHR and at a session like this one, seeing as at PAHO and the ICHR are the organizations who have mounted the best responses to address the needs of everyone in the hemisphere. We believe that the ICHR's work, as well as PAHO's work, are absolutely vital to address the global challenges we're facing, including access and enjoyment of all access for all people. And in this specific case, I'm referring to the right to health. We once again issue a call so that the OAS be not only a deliberative and informative forum, but a forum that also allows for coordinating specific actions to address challenges. We call for political will to allocate resources necessary to bolster the development pillar of our organization and to ensure that that has concrete impact on our society. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Next, we have the ambassador for Haiti. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, at the outset, allow me to commend you and commend the experts for their presentations today and also all of the rich information shared with us. The government of Haiti commends the efforts from the Pan American Health Organization in its fight against the COVID-19 pandemic to bolster the response in our region. Given the situation in the world and what is being done in other regions, this pandemic has also had a huge impact on our society in Haiti, and particularly in our healthcare system, which was particularly strained during this time. A lot of coordination went into responding to this pandemic, and this is facing long disruptions to essential services. And we know that a lot of individuals have been affected across the different socioeconomic strata. The most vulnerable communities have been impacted, and we've seen an exacerbation of the inequality in the region also reflected in our society. Mr. Chairman, given how serious this situation has been as caused by the pandemic in the world and the toll it has had for people in socioeconomic situations, the government of Haiti was able to manage the situation in a way that was able to contain the damage and to take the necessary steps and spare no effort in combating COVID-19 to protect everyone, particularly those who are experiencing disadvantaged situations. Haiti was honored to be one of the different countries highlighted by the WHO as having had the best approaches to address the COVID-19 cases that have been recorded. The strategic development plan in Haiti has included access to healthcare services for all the population. This has been highlighted by healthcare organizations and has been part of the 2021-2031 healthcare response plan. This plan was developed particularly focusing on building on what we have already accomplished and to also bolster the healthcare system in Haiti, ensuring that there is access for all communities and to have a more pragmatic approach at the steps that the healthcare sector is taking. There was also outreach work being done by the social ministry to ensure that our vaccination rate, which is low, continues to increase. We also express our gratitude for the COVAX mechanism, which highlights international solidarity and which has also allowed for many doses to actually reach our country. We can highlight the progress that has been made in the fight against the pandemic. We've seen a drop in hospitalizations and in deaths. However, we must still recognize that we have a long road ahead of us, particularly when it comes to healthcare resilience. Haiti, therefore, would like to urge the OAS and member countries to take on the other challenges that are being brought about by this pandemic, to take all of the necessary steps to bolster our capacity and to continue to transform our healthcare systems in order to ensure that we can have universal healthcare coverage. My delegation welcomes the action plan for the next Summit of the Americas, highlights healthcare in the Americas and focuses on increasing the strength and solidity of the healthcare sector, both in the region and within countries. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
You're very welcome, sir. Next, we have the representative for Paraguay. You have the floor.
Mr. Chairman, we appreciate this session on the COVID-19 pandemic, building resilience in the healthcare sector. We all know that the pandemic is still around us. But we should continue to discuss strategies to face this challenge that continues to take lives. We take note of what has been shared by our panelists. Benigno Lopez, I'd like to especially acknowledge you as a fellow Paraguayan and appreciate all of what we have heard during today's panel. In my country this week, the executive has decided to lift the healthcare restrictions, given that what is happening now is very different to what was happening at the beginning of the pandemic. We see the same challenges that were started in the beginning, that we started to see are no longer the ones that we're seeing today, given what we have been able to accomplish. When it comes to workplaces, universities, and other spaces, we want for people to come back to normal. That being said, there are still mask mandates in spaces where you cannot keep 6 feet distance from others through physical distancing, given the law passed in 2020. There's also a requirement for vaccination cards. The measures that the national government has taken are aimed at mitigating the COVID-19 pandemic, and those continue to be in place. The idea is to ensure that those communities that continue to be affected by the pandemic can remain safe. There are going to be measures that will continue having to do with subsidies for formal workers, and also government assistance for all of those economically impacted, including the sectors that have been impacted, like the tourism industry. Right now, we have the necessary steps and knowledge to take on the pandemic. And this is because we have learned to live with the virus. Therefore, going forward, we, as delegates before the OAS, need to also make a decision to come back to normal and come back to in-person meetings to the extent possible, because if other countries can and other organizations can, then we too should join this effort and try to phase out virtual meetings and come back to the room. Thank you.
Next, we have the Ambassador Ordonez. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank you, sir, for convening this meeting, and I'd like to thank the panelists for their very insightful presentations on this issue we're here to discuss. At the outset, I would like to recognize the role played by the OAS as well as by PAHO in its contribution through technical support to containing COVID-19, as well as contributions to the coordinated response to the pandemic and to the recovery efforts. In Colombia, the sector response to the COVID-19 pandemic focused on developing and building more capacity for health response and interventions, also to address demand and services and to bolster vaccination efforts. In just 1 year, with the latter effort, we have made it possible for over 80% of the population to have had at least 1 dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. And over 65% are fully vaccinated. As of February 19th, 2022, Colombia has over 76 million doses administered throughout the country, and over 33 million people have been fully vaccinated. Thanks to this effort, we are saving more lives, we are helping the economy recover, and we have very encouraging numbers. Without the vaccine, we could not talk about a strong recovery, as we see in the number of 10.6% of growth in the economy for 2021. In Peru is perhaps the only place where we see better numbers. This growth is important because of the impact it has had on the quality of people's standard of living and the economic impact it has had. That being said, we cannot ignore the fact that this health crisis has also laid bare Latin America and the Caribbean's high degree of dependence on imports of medication and other medical technologies from other places. It has also highlighted how vulnerable the global supply chains are when it comes to an emergency situation, as well as the big gaps in how diverse development, manufacturing, and design of vaccine capacity is throughout our region. Thanks to initiatives from the private sector as well as support from the government, on February 2nd, a vaccine manufacturing plant started to be built in Antioquia. This plant will help Colombia to become a knowledge hub and a development and innovation hub when it comes to vaccine development and manufacture, and will also help develop the necessary tools to address the health needs of the region. This initiative is also going to help strengthen the healthcare system, seeing as in a new plant we'll have not only vaccines manufactured to take on COVID-19, but also to address diseases like chikungunya, dengue, yellow fever, the flu, and Zika, among others. In closing, Mr. Chairman, my country believes that it is vital to improve coordination throughout the Americas and improve coordination for technical and support efforts in order to make sure that we have better and more pertinent information sharing, and that we can share technical and scientific information to increase access to the knowledge and treatment and vaccines and other necessary tools in order to help the most underprivileged and disadvantaged. In this regard, I would like to end my remarks by inviting all member countries of the OAS to do absolutely everything they can in order to increase public investment in health, to develop and build more capacity in each of our countries to develop raw materials, vaccines, and essential medicines. And all of this in order to reduce the vulnerability our countries have in future health emergencies that can be of the scales like the one we are seeing now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Next, we have the representative for El Salvador. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My delegation would like to thank you, Chair, for holding this special meeting as we continue to build on the dialogue on this issue, which continues to also inform and have an impact on the global and regional agenda. So thank you, and thank you to the panelists. As a country, we are at a significant point in history, but also at a time when we should be assessing what we have done regionally and nationally and what the world has done as well. We highlight how important it is to share best practices and to also focus on enhancing resilient healthcare systems in order to save lives and in order to also better address future emergencies. For our government, thinking about the worst case scenario has been absolutely key in our decision making. We have been able to act in due time and have been able to manage this pandemic-caused crisis. We've also been able to save lives, and that has been at the heart of the policies we have adopted, and we have focused on helping women as well as more vulnerable groups. This proactive approach allowed us to achieve what we achieved since the beginning of the pandemic. That includes the 3-month construction of a hospital specifically focusing on addressing pandemic cases with over 850 beds and 105 ICU units. The vaccine strategy we adopted allowed for high investment in human resources and biological and cold chain resources in order to expand coverage in the country. And that was in line with one of the recommendations from PAHO, which had to do with making it easier for individuals to get vaccinated closer to home. Just a year since the vaccine started in my country against COVID-19, the most recent indicators show that over 80% of our population has already had at least one dose. 73% has gotten 2 doses, and over 23% of the people in my country are boosted. We're also the first country to provide at the household level and for free a kit that has retrovirals in order to reduce the risk of hospitalization or death. At the same time, we continue to have a community screening through mobile clinics to detect cases and to contain the spread of the disease. All of these experiences were recently brought to the PAHO briefing room in order to share information. And this is also to thank everyone who was part of this process, the first responders and those who have stepped up to volunteer to also help us keep our infection numbers down. Mr. Chairman, in addition to the steps that every country has taken to address the impact of the health emergency, we recognize how important it is to not only support but also be active participants in the work being done by PAHO and by the WHO. This is to develop and negotiate an international instrument on prevention, preparedness, and response in the face of pandemics, as well as a regional plan to bolster the global response before health emergencies. In closing, we would like to thank PAHO for the support and technical assistance throughout every stage of the pandemic. And we also would like to remind everyone that while we continue to face this huge challenge, cooperation and solidarity are the recipe for coming out of this in the best way possible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. The next presenter is from Brazil. You have the floor.
Obrigado, Sr. Presidente.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brazil would like to commend you, sir, for holding this special session of the Permanent Council. Our Inter-American system has a key role to play in the response to COVID and in strengthening our healthcare systems going forward. Despite our increased capacity to manufacture medicines and vaccines, we have more to do. I appreciate what we have heard from all of the panelists and the initiatives that we have heard about from all of our panelists. We continue and look forward to continuing to work with all of you and address all other issues that have to do with public health. We had the pleasure of being with the Minister of Health in Brazil when we were visited by Carissa Etienne. Dr. Etienne came to visit us, and we learned a great deal from that visit. We talked about cooperation and the strategic response and common challenges, and all of this has been very helpful for Brazil and for the region. Coordination as we prepare for the Summit of the Americas has also been at the top of the agenda. Currently, the Ministry of Health is actually today discussing these issues at the highest levels and making sure that everything is reflecting the commitment that Brazil has to addressing all of these issues. Mr. Chairman, having the highest degree of health requires that we address inequality and that we increase capacity within countries and without countries. We need to continue to build on the efforts that have been implemented through international organizations, increasing capacity as well as increasing the funding for these efforts and enhancing cooperation and ensuring that we have the most efficient response being delivered in order to ensure that we achieve our goal. The COVID-19 pandemic made it very clear that countries need to strengthen their healthcare systems as well as increase the response capacity around the world to these kinds of emergencies. What we've seen around the world has shown that countries were simply not prepared to first pick up on what was happening in the beginning and then to actually mitigate the impact of the disease. We know that in order to increase resilience in healthcare systems, there needs to be broad and prior preparation through the most appropriate steps in ensuring that things like universal health care are implemented and that there is an increase in local production capacity and enhancing international and global supply chains. International cooperation can allow for more equal access and can allow us to have what is necessary to prevent these kinds of cases. Another important issue is geographic diversification of vaccine manufacturing, which is of particular importance for countries who are in the development category when they are faced with these global threats. Brazil is one of the players in the efforts in search of solidarity for addressing these global issues. We also know that the only way to come out of this pandemic is to ensure that every country has the necessary instruments to contain the pandemic. Therefore, we need to remember that we cannot be safe until we are all safe. In Brazil, under our Constitution, we provide universal health care, and that also applies to foreigners, regardless of their legal status in the country. There needs to be increased access in all countries of healthcare coverage. We are proud to have delivered the largest vaccination campaign in our history with tens of millions. As a matter of fact, over 175 million people in Brazil have gotten their 2 doses of the vaccine against COVID-19, accounting for 85% of the population. Within that group, 78% has been fully vaccinated. That is over 153 million people. And these results have been made possible thanks to the efforts through our single healthcare system, as well as the success of our vaccine outreach campaigns. This is also enhanced thanks to the COVAX mechanism and some of the other technical and technological support we have received. We just received a new package of doses of AstraZeneca, a great amount of which was actually manufactured in the country. We know that safe treatments and efficient treatment and safe supplies are all a key part of these efforts. And Brazil continues to adhere to the ADPIC and will continue to find better ways to make what is necessary available to address the pandemic. We believe that technology transfers are key also in order to strengthen our healthcare system. And we believe that there's a need for mechanisms that ensure sustainability of national systems. We saw that during the pandemic, these systems were strained. Brazil is committed to the ACT Accelerator and COVAX, as well as to solidarity and to other COVID-19 technology transfers, which are all key to ensure that we all have the necessary supplies and instruments to tackle the pandemic. Given the unequal access to vaccines throughout the world, which makes it more difficult to come out of this pandemic, and the resulting crises, our government believed that it was important to begin to implement immunization efforts in the country. we also announced that we'd be donating 10 million doses through COVAX to be distributed to the countries most in need, and under the specific criteria defined by the WHO. This has to do with the known constraints to vaccine manufacturing in many countries, and also how overburdened the global supply chain has been. This is why Brazil has been working to continue to increase the amount of medical supplies making their way around the world. We have been working with the WHO and with PAHO in order to improve our medical complex throughout the world and ensure that we can help other developing countries. There are a number of initiatives that I can mention here that are part of the efforts. There are patent institutes and other healthcare institutes, as well as other organizations that we countries in the South have been working on. Brazil has been working on increasing efforts to improve technologies and ensure that we, within our country, have access to these as well as other countries in need. These are all part of the strategy to enhance global healthcare. We are also continuing to focus on key technologies like mRNA vaccines. This is one of the efforts that we have been driving within one of our key development facilities. Brazil has public labs with the necessary capacity to provide vaccine doses to other countries in the region, and we participate in international instruments like COVAX. Mr. Chairman, we're also undergoing negotiations right now in order to improve our national healthcare systems, and we're also part of the conversations alongside the WHO and other organizations in order to ensure equal access for all countries and equal distribution for vaccines. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We have of the presentations to no more than 5 minutes. Ambassador for Vasquez, you do have the floor, please.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Distinguished Assistant Secretary General, esteemed permanent and alternate representatives and distinguished panelists, on behalf of the Peruvian delegation, let me say how very much we appreciate the work you are doing, sir, as chair, distinguished ambassador, having underscored the importance of this issue, building resilience in the healthcare sector. And we commend you for understanding that it's resolution 2027, resolution resilience in COVID-19 that was adopted the last 21st session of the General Assembly as Peru recommended it. We can only hope that that mandate will continue to be recognized and implemented, and commend you yet again, sir, for convening this meeting with the very distinguished panelists who have certainly enlightened us with their very sound and informative statements. We're deeply grateful to their contribution to our ongoing thinking and the holding of this meeting. We are absolutely convinced that with their recommendations, we can only do better in each of our countries. Obviously, continuing to bend over backwards to do better, to achieve universal health care and further improve the digitalization of our health services. We cannot commend enough the Pan American Health Organization and its esteemed director, Dr. Carissa Etienne, for moving precisely towards a more equitable distribution of vaccines in the hemisphere and carrying out the regional plans that each has drafted. We're sure that if we follow that route, we can only do better, particularly the plan on resilience and health in the Americas, the STARS-CoV-2 network, the tool to model and prevent evolution of the virus. We also commend efforts made for better coordination amongst the regions of this hemisphere to try to offset the inevitable discrepancies that exist in terms of the vaccination distribution in the hemisphere, particularly as regards messenger RNA and the CTAP efforts. We can only hope that that work will continue ever more strongly, and you can certainly count on Peru's support to that effect, as well as certainly Dr. Etienne. Peru continues for its part, doing everything it can to hone to the roadmaps that have been set forward in the resolution which I've already referred to. 74% of our population has already had 2 doses of this vaccine. A couple of days ago, 23rd February, our Ministry of Health launched our plan for the fight against COVID-19 over 2022. The emphasis there is going to be to try to cut community infection by strengthening both public and private labs for opportune diagnosis and the opportune and timely distribution of kits and proper masking. This is going to be greatly emphasized at the primary level of care, both as regards patients already suffering from COVID and not. All of the governmental agencies will have its role to play, as many of us have already talked about, and we will be earmarking much more money than ever before to that end. We're doing what we can and trying to do better to cut transmission, to strengthen our primary health care system, and above all, to maintain our vision on human rights, equity, and most vulnerable populations. I cannot close without applauding the efforts of our brother and sister republics here that have really, really made a difference to try to be in a better position for when the next crisis befalls. Thank you.
Ambassador, next we have the Ambassador for Canada. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. A pleasure to see you this morning, and I'd like to start, of course, by thanking the panelists and the presentations that we had this morning on this very important issue. And the comments I'm about to make, I think, are very much in line with many of the comments that we had heard actually from the presenters today. It's clear, as we're continuing to grapple with COVID-19 and the pandemic, that equitable and resilient health systems are important. And that's something I think that's become exceptionally clear over the course of the last couple of years. The pandemic has tested the capacity of our health systems like never before. But although it's been a test of not only our systems, but of our resolve, it's also been a test from which we can take some important and significant lessons. And these are lessons that we have to learn if we're going to be able to ensure that we're well positioned to confront future health crises. And that's a comment I heard from several of our presenters this morning. In doing so, we have to address the social, economic, and environmental determinants of health through a health, equity, and gender lens. And this needs to be supported by comprehensive and accurate data collection, as well as evidence-based interventions and policies. Health systems are most effective when they're equipped to deliver comprehensive quality services for all. This requires us to redouble collectively our efforts to reinforce health systems and essential public health functions with a core focus on developing lasting capacity for primary care. And in particular, it's critical to ensure that all countries that will have effective frontline community-level healthcare workers. Those are the ones who form the foundations of our health systems. And Mr. Chair, I'll continue with a few comments in French as well. Il est également essentiel de reconnaître.
It is equally important to recognize the issues that must necessarily take into account climate change. Canada is very much in support of health systems that do so and that aim to better adapt our systems to that climate change and therefore boost our health system. And to that end, of course, we join the international community in understanding the absolute need to think of health in the context of COP26. We want health systems that are resilient vis-a-vis the climate change and that aim for low carbon emissions. Canada very much sustains the work of Panho regarding efforts to better fight COVID-19, including the world financing system, the World Health Financing System. We can only hope that primary health systems will be better assisted and that future efforts will be thus improved. It's clear that coronavirus simply cut through all of our national systems, whatever the governance, and challenged us in terms of data collection and proper policies to make sure that we could intervene in an agile and effective manner. Better public-private alliances are clearly necessary and merit being reinforced on an ongoing basis. This is what will put us in a better position to aim for truly resilient systems. That certainly is Canada's aim. And I thank you very much, sir, for the opportunity. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I can only begin by congratulating the very distinguished speakers who were so generous in sharing their knowledge, and most especially kudos to Dr. Carissa Etienne. To you too, Chair, for taking the initiative and allowing us to broach this subject, which is certainly timely. We commend you for that. Now, we in Bolivia have about 11 million inhabitants, 12,005,047 doses have been applied, of which 4,700,000 and some to the second dose and the balance to the first. 1,033,667 have been applied, have been given the single dose. These are data from yesterday. 166,000 minor children have gotten their first dose, and a good percentage now have both. We're doing our best. It's not easy, but we're doing our very, very best to move forward and ensure that everyone has the full program of vaccination, and we're deeply grateful to the help of numbers of countries here for making that possible, most especially thanks for the COVAX mechanism that has made all the difference to us. There are 100-some thousand patients that have recovered. We've had about 10,000 people affected by day. But as of yesterday, we have on average about 1,000 new infections per day. Alas, 6 deaths per day on average. This means that we've got a mortality rate of about 0.6%, which is very different when we did not have the vaccination system in place. There's no question that the vaccine is the way to go. In a final assault on this pandemic, Bolivia hopes that we can draw on the benefits of everything that has been generated thus far, particularly freeing up the patents that would put us all in a better position to help a greater number of people. And let's hope that throughout the world that can happen so that we can finally, jointly and severally defeat this terrible scourge. Economic measures are important if we want to go back to normal, and so too it matters for us to learn to live with it. And to that end, the shepherding of the OAS and PAHO itself will make, I think, a huge difference. Let's hope that 2022 will be the year we finally trounce this terrible challenge. Thanks again, Chair, for the opportunity.
Ambassador Abdullah, you have the floor, sir.
Gracias, presidente. Muy gentil por su
Thank you very much, sir. Let me begin, as others have done, by expressing my appreciation to the speakers. They always teach us a lot, and today was no exception. And we all know that if ever there were a time when information made all the difference, this is it. So we're very, very grateful for their insight, for their science, for their practicality, and special and heartfelt thanks to Dr. Carissa Etienne. Certainly the cooperation of the IDB, Maurice Claire, and all of the authorities that have spoken and that have lent a very strong hand are deeply appreciated. Allow me, Chair, briefly, without ever considering that we're done with COVID, were that were true. I'll simply say that our own president, together with the presidency of the Republic and his Minister of Health, served as a great tripod, as it were, a tripartite, very effective team that allowed us to go forward. While it is true that Argentina has a very solid health system, and over the years it pretty much has functioned well, certainly in the era of COVID, and we know we're not alone in that respect, we were greatly challenged and of course had to adapt as the virus adapted. And given all things considered, we have 78.26% of coverage with all three. So I think that Uruguay is as much where it needs to be as could possibly be possible. For those above 50 years of age, particular attention is being given, and those, the minors, or the very younger minors, I should say, are also the attention that is before us now. So we're going forward. And I think, given what has been said here today, everyone, I believe, in one way or another, and very elegantly, have each emphasized the importance of coordination. Coordination, it appears, is golden. And without it, we shall surely be back to square one, where we're going to end up in very asymmetric positions where, quite frankly, everybody is pulling in his and her own direction, and we know very well that is not the preferred mode of action. What is the lesson that we've learned? Surely it's clear. It's prevention. I'm sure I'm not preaching any gospel we haven't heard. Prevention is what needs to be at the forefront of our minds. Because the money that we may bemoan has to be spent on prevention, at the end of the day, and very quickly I would add, ends up being a very, very necessary investment. It's mathematical. If in the social sector we're better off with the due prevention, certainly the economy in general is too. And that's how we see it in Uruguay. We've done that with COVID, and we did so absolutely convinced that there really was no choice, and we had to find the way to meet that additional expenditure. Of course, we're concerned by the general economic trends, and I say it with greatest respect, You know, I believe, without apologies, that there should be more of a U-shaped curve with a better coupling of the economic and the social. And when countries can aspire to the notion that sooner rather than later there will be an upturn, well, that's something to look forward to. I also believe, as many of us do, that we do have the responsibility to be present, to be attentive to all of the various aspects here. And I'm not speaking here as a rabid a unionist of any kind. I'm just saying that across the board, I believe labor in general has to be very much at the core of our concerns. And as the great Spanish philosopher and author Ortega y Gasset said in so many words, we have to be there. Be there. And I think that people's physical presence at the workplace is something we need to aim for and work towards. That's what I'm saying. But I think we're slowly getting there. We're moving forward. And again, thanks very much to everyone. And I can only exhort us all to keep coordinating because that's the name of the game. Thank you.
You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Chair. I will be brief. I just wanted to, first of all, greet everybody this morning. We want to also, of course, thank you, Ambassador Hall, for requesting this special meeting. And on behalf of my own government, I want to welcome the participation of Dr. Wolf and express our appreciation for all of the esteemed panelists' presentations and remarks. The high-level representation today speaks clearly to the importance of this issue. Just to follow up on the February and November resolutions and on prior meetings concerning equitable distribution of vaccines, I would note, in order to bring others up to date, that the United States is the largest contributor to Gavi in support of COVAX. And we've provided, in partnership with COVAX or bilaterally, over 454 million doses to more than 110 countries. And of these, some 62 million doses of vaccines to at least 27 countries in the Western Hemisphere, in partnership with COVAX or bilaterally. So with that, I would just like to once again thank the chair for holding this discussion, which was much broader than simply the challenges of COVID. And I think for that reason, a very welcome and important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Next, we go to the representative for Spain, the observer representative. You have the floor.
I thank you very much, Chair, and a very good morning to you all. Let me begin by thanking you, Chair, as Chairman of the Permanent Council for calling this meeting, and thank you on behalf of Spain to all of the speakers that have enlightened us and also all of the input of the member countries to that end. Kudos to Dr. Etienne for the enormous efforts she has deployed together with her organization over the course of this pandemic. And we know that is an ongoing struggle. You know Spain is with you, and we follow you step by step. This crisis, COVID-19, has certainly put all of our health systems under enormous stress. Our health professionals, I dare say, throughout the world have been bending over backwards, and we think they merit our greatest admiration and gratitude. We in Spain have done everything we could to ensure that our own health systems are more sustainable, more resilient. How that? Through universal health, through equity, through inclusion, in order to ensure the right to health of all. That is the mantra. I thank all of you, public and private representatives, for the manner in which they have allowed us to learn so much through the pandemic. We in the health sector understand that health systems that are public and universal is paramount. That has to go hand in hand with international cooperation mechanisms. Let me also underscore the importance of primary health as the backbone of the systems that we must have in hand if we truly do want a resilient and a gender equity included at all levels. One of the resilient public health columns has to be that digital health, mental health, and the prevention of suicide must be borne in mind. Better assistance to prevent cancer, HIV, and sexually transmissible diseases, mother-child assistance, and the environment, among others. In other words, we espouse the One Health vision in sum. Also, the question of vaccination. Spain has done everything it could to be up to the mark in that regard, and to assist every way we could through solidarity, through cooperation, and through multilateralism. We understood that that was the only way to go. Spain was the first country to donate vaccines to Latin America through the COVAX system of PAHO, and for the second dose, when we came through on the commitment of global commitment involving more than 50 million doses, of which 20 plus million are earmarked for Latin America and the Caribbean. We also have, of course, bilateral cooperation, and we have been pioneers there, sharing, free of patent burdens, the CTAP system, and we certainly urge other countries to jump on board that necessary plank. Multilateralism is the way to go. We believe, therefore, that the International Treaty on Pandemics is important to bear in mind because there will be future health crises. And together with the international health regulation and a strengthening of a multilateralism in health, we'll be better positioned to face it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The last of the observer representatives is the Holy See. You have the floor, sir.
Gracias, señor presidente, secretario.
Thank you very much, Chair, distinguished Assistant Secretary General. The delegation of Holy See is deeply grateful to you for having called this special session of the Permanent Council of the OAS to deal with the issue of the COVID-19 pandemic and the importance of boosting resilience in health. The Holy See follows very, very closely the various twists and turns of the pandemic, most especially in this hemisphere, where we know so many are affected by the scourge. We have been given the opportunity to work together, to join forces, and to help those who need us most. We believe that it is absolutely essential to recognize the work of the international organizations, including the Pan American Health Organization, as well as other groups in society that each are attempting to contribute to this struggle. We particularly recognize health professionals that we know are risking their very own lives to help the lives of others. The Holy Father, Pope Francis, in his discourse to the diplomatic corps recently, as accredited to the Holy See, said recently we have seen over these last days how the struggle against this pandemic calls on us to rise above what we have done previously. The effective vaccination campaign has, we know, diminished the risk of a very serious ongoing danger posed by this disease. Yet we must intensify our efforts to vaccinate our population to the extent humanly possible. And to that end, surely, we must not only marshal our own personal efforts, but deploy political will, both individually and collectively. The Holy Father has said, vaccines, we know, are not a magic wand. They represent, along with the necessary treatment that is being developed, offer the most reasonable way forward to prevent as well as to treat this great challenge. And to that end, the Holy See has called out on governments, on companies, on international organizations, calling for solidarity in the supply of vaccines to be made available to all, with particular attention to the most vulnerable among us, the most needy. We cannot allow that the market trounce love and charity. So the Holy See reiterates its call to all the governments present here to show their ongoing commitment and responsibility in the face of universal coverage, and to do so through a coordinated approach, both nationally, regionally, and internationally, broadly speaking, so that the capacities of the most needed of our countries, the neediest among us, be met as we must. We celebrate the idea, and so the Holy Father has said, that there be an international coverage to resolution to this pandemic, so that our health organizations, regionally and internationally, show that solidarity, so that policies may be adopted such that the access to instruments, diagnosis, vaccines, and pharmacopoeia may be available to all. To that end, Chair, we believe it would be very timely to draw up rules to better face monopolies, so that a better organized and more coherent collective approach may have a chance of prevailing. Mr. Chairman, the Holy See believes in a common response to common challenges, so that health for all is not just a slogan, so that it may be at everybody's reach and not the purview of a few privileged among us. We wish to avoid any polarization, and we hope that we can see our way through to join forces, because surely no one can go it alone. Thank you, sir.
To offer the floor to Assistant Secretary Mendes. And following that, if there are any of the panelists who are still available and have an interest for offering comments, they would like to invite them to do so after the Secretary General has offered his comments. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of Secretary General Luis Almagro, who is unable to participate in this important session of the Permanent Council, I wish to make some brief remarks on the topic under discussion. I would like to start by saying a very special thank you to Dr. Carissa Etienne, to Dr. Mitchell Wolf, Mr. Camilo Cid, and Mr. Benigno Lopez for being here with us this morning, and to thank them also for their insightful presentations, which have further enhanced our understanding of building resilience in the health sector to stem the deleterious impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, prepare for any future outbreaks, and foster healthy societies. As has been reiterated here and in previous discussions, the COVID-19 pandemic has generated enormous human, social, and economic costs, claiming millions of lives and leaving many more suffering ill health as a direct or indirect consequence of the virus. This situation has placed immense pressure on healthcare services, which were already overstretched before the pandemic, and which will continue to be overburdened as the pandemic continues. As has been documented, the pandemic has severely impacted our hemisphere. The Americas is now the region with the second highest number of cases globally, and unfortunately, the region which registers the highest number of deaths associated with the virus. Furthermore, in a region already plagued by inequality, the pandemic has disproportionately affected the most vulnerable populations. The COVID-19 pandemic has undeniably deepened deficiencies and inequities in healthcare in areas of equal access to essential medicines such as pharmaceuticals, vaccines, and other life-saving treatments. This chasm between the rich and the poor is affecting the response capacity of health systems and limiting the provision of health services, leading to higher cases, increased death, and severe illness. While in many countries the surge of cases related to the Omicron variant has fallen over the last 2 weeks, healthcare workers continue to face challenging conditions due to systems that are unprepared to support them. En cuanto a la vacunación, todavía hay 13 países y territorios en las Américas que aún
There are still 13 countries and territories in the Americas who have yet to achieve the targets from the WHO of having a 40% vaccine coverage. And this is due to several reasons. One of them has to do with a lack of vaccine sites in remote areas, the experience necessary, and also the infrastructure for appropriate storage of vaccines, as we have heard from PAHO. There is no doubt that the magnitude of this pandemic has made it the largest, most challenging global issue of our time, pulling back the curtain on the realities of deficiencies in our systems and the lack of resources necessary to contain the virus and to keep our people safe. The way these challenges have come together has really affected our government's ability to effectively respond and to simply keep basic services open for all. There have been some systemic changes that have been implemented, but the pandemic in some way has actually ramped up. We see that there has been more telehealth services provided, and there is improved assistance overall, but there is still a long road ahead of us to improve the health response. We agree that ensuring that vaccines should be accessible for all, and that containing and mitigating the virus continue to be absolutely vital. However, it is also of vital importance to continue working so that our healthcare systems can be more resilient and more robust through, among other things, efficient investment in primary healthcare and promoting healthcare and in disease prevention. We firmly believe that everyone should enjoy their right to health, particularly those who are part of the underprivileged and disadvantaged communities. This is why we very much welcome today's discussion, which really bring attention back to the need to redouble efforts and to all make sure that we are doing our part as part of this global response. Hemispheric cooperation and regional solidarity are vital principles as we all search for a productive, healthy, and resilient hemisphere. In order to have a bolstered healthcare system, we need to make sure that we have the necessary tools. It is only through having the necessary tools that we can have universal healthcare coverage. In order to make all of this a reality, we believe that on the one hand, there needs to be more progress done in effective policies and strategies, and part of this is developing the technical and necessary tools to support member countries. And to do that, PAHO's work is absolutely essential. It provides support for the healthcare agencies in the region. Also, when it comes to technical assistance and finance, the available mechanisms from development banks, as is the case for the IDB, as well as other regional and sub-regional agencies, these are all absolutely instrumental in ensuring that member countries can mount the appropriate response and have what they need to address the gaps in the system and to actually achieve systemic change. For example, in having the necessary health technologies for research, for R&D, all key in achieving true healthcare overhaul and transformation. As we've seen demonstrated very clearly, healthcare is the backbone for many of the sectors and segments of our society, for commerce, for education, for work, just to name a few.
Nor can they effectively contribute towards supporting their households and communities if they are in poor health. This leads to an overall negative impact on the integral development of society. At the last regular session of the General Assembly, member states adopted the resolution on developments in the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on the hemisphere, which urges member states to make the greatest possible efforts to continue strengthening public investment in health and take strategic and targeted measures to achieve resilient health systems by rapidly advancing towards access to and coverage of health. This resolution provided a direct course of action for ways in which we can build resilience in the healthcare sector. Let us recall and be guided by the principles outlined in the Declaration of Alma Ata, a foundational document adopted more than 40 years ago, whose affirmations on the right to health, the importance of equity, and the need for solidarity still remain relevant today. In this regard, the OAS will continue to use its convening power and to serve as a platform for member states and other strategic partners, such as PAHO, to dialogue, to share experiences, and formulate tangible action plans geared at transforming health systems. Enhanced training of medical professionals, the modernization of healthcare facilities, increased investments in research and development, and the adoption of advanced technologies are all essential elements in building resilience in the healthcare sector. Continuemos trabajando en acciones transformadoras.
Let's continue working on transformative actions, ensuring that our actions are targeted and that we always have people at the heart of our policies and that we sustainably invest in their well-being. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, ESG Mendes. I would like now to find out if there are any members of the panel group who would like to offer a few comments. I believe I saw Ambassador Dr. Etienne a few moments ago that seems to have disappeared. Dr. Etienne, you have the floor, please.
And I took the floor merely to thank our member states for their kind words with regards to PAHO and the work that we've done with them over the last 2 years and counting. And also to say that none of us can predict what this pandemic is going to do. I wish we could. And so we need to be vigilant and we need to be ready. And even while we pull back some of the public health measures, we have to be willing to reinstate them if the evidence shows that that is necessary. So we need to continue to balance these two things. And of course, I just want to make the point, and certainly I'm not going to reiterate the splendid advocacy of our Assistant Secretary General, Mr. Mendes, as far as health system and health is concerned. But I just want to reiterate that we cannot go back to normal. There is nothing that is going back to how health systems were. They were totally inadequate. They remain inadequate. We need to move forward with health systems that are certainly more responsive and certainly better able to respond to this pandemic, to preparation for future pandemic, but also to be able to deal with the many challenges that are still to be confronted, including climate change, including One Health, including the NCD really pandemic proportions that we are very silent about, and all the other challenges that we need to face. And keeping in mind that we need to strive for universal access to health and universal health coverage, and also to ensure that particularly our primary health care level is better invested in and delivers quality care for all. I want to stop here congratulating all of our member states for the work that they've done, and saying that we continue to strive to work with each one of them, so together we can achieve a goal that is better for all of our people. Recognizing also that solidarity, true solidarity, is going to be important as we move towards sustainable development. And we will move towards sustainable development because we will recover from the pandemic. And if we have ensured that our transformation agenda is well developed, we will retake our economic development and build back better for the future. So thank you so much. And thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for also inviting PAHO to participate. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Thanks very much for offering those very, very persuasive marks to the end. If there are no other delegations wishing to make interventions, and having heard the very informative presentations and comments on the issue, I wish to propose that the Permanent Council take note of the presentations made by the special invited guests, as well as those of the delegations. Dear colleagues, we have concluded consideration of the agenda for today's meeting. Before closing the meeting, permit me to reiterate my appreciation to the distinguished authorities and representatives from PAHO, CDC, ECLAC, and the IDB for their very enlightening presentations. Permit me also to draw attention to another Permanent Council meeting that will occur at 3:30 this afternoon, which will address the situation in Ukraine. Thank you, distinguished colleagues. This meeting is adjourned.